The weight of the tray balanced on my left palm had become second nature after 2 years at Carmelo's, the kind of muscle memory that let my mind wander while my body performed the routine. I'd learned to distribute the weight just so, keeping my wrist locked and my elbow tucked, the way Marco had taught me during my first week when I'd nearly dropped an entire order of osso buco onto a regular's lap. The restaurant smelled perpetually of garlic, fresh basil, and the yeasty warmth of bread baking in the brick oven, scents that clung to my hair and clothes long after my shifts ended. I moved between tables with practiced efficiency, my worn black flats silent against the polished hardwood floors. The lunch rush had settled into a comfortable hum of conversation and clinking silverware. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows facing Michigan Avenue, casting golden rectangles across the white tablecloths and glinting off the crystal wine glasses I'd spent the morning polishing until my fingers pruned. My lower back ached with that familiar tightness that came from standing for 6 hours straight, and I mentally calculated how many more hours until I could soak in the cheap bathtub of my studio apartment. The tips had been decent today, enough to cover groceries and maybe put a little toward the electric bill that was already a week overdue. "Ava, private dining room needs attention," Marco called from behind the host stand, his salt and pepper mustache twitching the way it always did when he was stressed. "The Valente party arrived early. Make sure everything's perfect." My stomach did an odd little flip at the name, though I couldn't say why. Chicago had plenty of Valentes. It was a common enough Italian surname in this neighborhood, where third-generation families still spoke with their hands and argued about whose nonna made the best Sunday gravy. I nodded, smoothing down my black apron and checking that my dark hair was still secured in its low bun. The private dining room was reserved for special occasions, and customers who valued discretion, tucked away behind a heavy oak door at the back of the restaurant. I'd only served there a handful of times, usually for business lunches where the conversation stopped the moment I entered to refill water glasses. The tray I carried now held fresh bread, olive oil, and balsamic vinegar, the pre-meal service that Carmelo insisted on for all private dining guests. I balanced it carefully as I approached the door, taking a breath to center myself the way my therapist had taught me. 4 counts in, hold, 4 counts out. It had been 2 years since the divorce was finalized. 2 years since I'd left behind the suffocating marriage that had nearly broken me. 2 years since I'd rebuilt my life from scratch in this city where nobody knew my story. I pushed through the door with my hip, my eyes still on the tray to ensure nothing spilled. "Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'll be your server today." The words died in my throat. 5 men sat around the oval table, but I saw only one. Lorenzo Valente occupied the head of the table like a king holding court, his charcoal suit jacket draped over the back of his chair, the sleeves of his crisp white dress shirt rolled up to reveal forearms I'd once traced with my fingers, in the darkness of a hotel room I'd tried desperately to forget. His dark hair was swept back from his face in that same effortless style, shorter on the sides, longer on top, every strand in place except for one rebellious piece that fell across his forehead. He'd aged in the 2 years since that night, but it only made him more striking. New lines bracketed his mouth, a faint scar I didn't remember marked his left cheekbone, and something harder had settled into his storm-gray eyes. The gold watch on his wrist caught the light as he lifted a glass of water, the same watch I remembered watching him fasten as he dressed to leave, neither of us acknowledging that we'd never see each other again. But it wasn't Lorenzo who had stolen my breath and rooted my feet to the floor. In his arms, secured against his chest with one large hand, was a baby, 10 months old, maybe a year at most, with a shock of dark curls and those same gray eyes that were currently fixed on me with unnerving intensity. The child wore tiny dress pants and a miniature button-up shirt, as if someone had created a perfect, scaled-down version of the man holding him. Time seemed to slow as the baby's face transformed. His rosebud mouth opened in a smile that revealed 2 bottom teeth, his chubby arms extended toward me, and then, in a voice that carried clearly through the suddenly silent room, he said, "Mama." The tray slipped from my nerveless fingers. I caught it at the last second, my waitress instincts overriding my shock, but olive oil sloshed over the rim of its small dish, soaking into the bread. Nobody noticed. Every eye in the room had fixed on me, then on Lorenzo, then on the baby who was now straining in his father's arms, reaching for me with determination. "Mama," he said again, more insistently, his little fists opening and closing in that universal gesture of a child demanding to be held. Lorenzo's face had gone completely blank, the kind of expressionless mask I'd seen once before, during that night 2 years ago when I'd told him I couldn't do this, that it was just one night to forget our respective miseries, that we'd never see each other again. But his hands tightened protectively around his son, and something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. "Matteo," he murmured, his voice low and rough, speaking to the child but looking at me. "What are you saying, Piccolo?" One of the other men at the table, a broad-shouldered man with silver threading through his dark hair, leaned forward. "Boss, the kid's never called anyone that before. Not since—" He stopped abruptly, clearly thinking better of whatever he'd been about to say. My professional smile felt like it was cracking at the edges. I set the tray down on the sideboard with hands that trembled slightly, my mind racing through impossible calculations. 10 months old, maybe 12. I tried to count backward, but the numbers wouldn't cooperate. That night had been 2 years ago, during the worst month of my divorce when I'd been staying at a hotel, because I couldn't stand to be in the house anymore, when I'd met a stranger at the bar who looked as lost and angry as I felt. We'd both had too much to drink. We'd both needed to feel something other than the emptiness that had been consuming us. We'd both agreed it meant nothing, that it was a single night outside of reality, that we'd forget it ever happened. I had tried so hard to forget. "I apologize," I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. "Let me get you fresh bread. I'll be right back." I turned toward the door, needing to escape, needing to breathe, needing to think. But Lorenzo's voice stopped me, speaking my name for the first time in 2 years. "Ava." It wasn't a question or a command, just my name, spoken in that same low timbre that had whispered it against my skin in the darkness. I turned slowly, meeting his gaze across the space that suddenly felt impossibly small, despite the generous size of the private dining room. Matteo was still reaching for me, his small face crumpling now, on the verge of tears because the person he'd inexplicably identified as Mama wasn't coming to him. "Perhaps," Lorenzo said carefully, each word chosen with precision, "we should talk. After your shift." It wasn't a request. Men like Lorenzo Valente didn't make requests. They stated intentions as if they were already accomplished facts, and the world rearranged itself to accommodate their will. I should have said no. Should have claimed I had plans, that my boyfriend was expecting me, that I needed to study for the nursing classes I'd finally enrolled in after years of putting off my education. Should have recognized the danger in those gray eyes that matched the baby's, in the sudden tension that had filled the room, in the way Lorenzo's men were all carefully not looking at me while clearly cataloging every detail of my appearance. "I get off at 3, I heard myself say instead. "I'll wait." The words held a weight of promise and threat in equal measure. I nodded once, grabbed the tray, and fled to the kitchen where I could finally let myself acknowledge the truth that was pounding through my veins with every beat of my panicked heart. I knew exactly how old that baby was. I knew because I'd spent 6 weeks after that night in a fog of nausea that I'd attributed to stress, before a missed period had sent me to a clinic where a kind-faced doctor had delivered news that shattered what remained of my carefully reconstructed world. I'd been 12 weeks pregnant when I'd made the appointment for a termination, driven by panic and the knowledge that I couldn't bring a child into the chaos of my life. But I'd never made it to that second appointment. I'd woken up in a hospital bed instead, the aftermath of a car accident I barely remembered. My ex-husband, in a final act of cruelty, had been the one to tell me I'd lost the baby, had stood over my hospital bed and said the universe had done us both a favor, that I would have been a terrible mother anyway, that at least now I could move on with my pathetic little life without the complication of a bastard child. I'd believed him, had grieved alone in my tiny apartment, had tried to forget that night with the stranger at the bar, just as I'd tried to forget everything else from that horrible year. But babies don't just disappear. Babies don't cease to exist because a spiteful man tells you they do. My hands found the edge of the stainless steel prep counter, and I gripped it hard enough that my knuckles went white. Through the small window in the kitchen door, I could see into the private dining room where Lorenzo had stood up, still holding Matteo against his chest. The baby had buried his face in his father's neck, his little shoulders shaking with the kind of sobs that only children can produce, heartbroken and utterly inconsolable. And I knew, with a certainty that bypassed logic and went straight to some primal place in my gut, that the child I'd been told I lost was crying in the arms of the man I'd tried to forget. The question wasn't whether Matteo was mine. My body already knew the answer, recognizing him with an instinct I hadn't known I possessed. The question was what Lorenzo Valente had done to make everyone believe his son's mother was dead, and what he would do now that I'd appeared like a ghost at his table, called forth by a child who somehow remembered the woman who'd carried him, even if he'd never known her face. I made it through the rest of my shift on autopilot, my body executing tasks while my mind spiraled through increasingly impossible scenarios. I delivered meals, refilled drinks, smiled at customers, and cleared plates, all while my thoughts kept circling back to that private dining room and the child who'd called me Mama. Marco kept shooting me concerned glances from the host stand, clearly having heard something about the incident from one of the bussers. In a restaurant this size, gossip spread faster than a grease fire. By the time I'd returned with fresh bread, hands steady through sheer force of will, the Valente party had already been served their entrees, and I'd been quietly reassigned to the main dining room. I should have been grateful for the reprieve. Instead, I felt like a prisoner granted a brief stay of execution, knowing that 3 o'clock was approaching with the inexorability of a train barreling down the tracks. At 2:47, I finished wiping down my last table and found Marco waiting for me by the time clock, his normally jovial expression serious. "Ava, piccola," he said quietly, using the affectionate diminutive he'd adopted for all his younger servers. "That man in the private room. You know who he is?" I shook my head, though dread was already coiling in my stomach. Marco sighed, glancing toward the kitchen door as if to ensure we wouldn't be overheard. "Lorenzo Valente. His father, Vittorio, he owned half the businesses in this neighborhood. Restaurants, construction companies, unions. When Vittorio died 3 years ago, Lorenzo took over everything." He paused meaningfully. Everything. The implication was clear. The Valente family wasn't just wealthy. They were connected, powerful in ways that had nothing to do with legitimate business. I'd lived in Chicago long enough to understand what that meant, the hierarchy that existed in the shadows of the city's gleaming facade. "He wants to speak with me after my shift," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Marco's expression tightened with worry. "Madonna, Ava, what did you do?" "Nothing," I said quickly, too quickly. "I mean, I knew him, before, 2 years ago, before I started working here, I couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't explain that night to Marco, who had a daughter my age and treated me like family. Understanding dawned in his weathered face, followed by something that looked like pity. "Go change," he said gently. "Don't keep him waiting. Men like Lorenzo Valente, they don't like to wait." I nodded numbly and headed to the employee locker room, where I shed my apron and pulled on the cardigan I'd worn to work that morning. My reflection in the small mirror above the sink showed a pale woman with dark circles under her eyes and worry lines that hadn't been there 2 years ago. I looked older than my 24 years, worn down by late shifts and early classes, and the constant effort of rebuilding a life from nothing. I thought about calling Ethan, my boyfriend of 8 months. Sweet, stable Ethan who taught high school English and had never raised his voice, who brought me coffee when I studied late and rubbed my feet after long shifts. Ethan, who represented everything safe and normal that I'd been desperately trying to build since the divorce. But what would I tell him? That the child I'd thought I lost was alive. That I'd lied, by omission if not commission, about nearly everything that had happened during that dark period of my life. My phone stayed in my pocket. Lorenzo was waiting in the now empty private dining room, standing by the window with his back to the door. Mateo was nowhere to be seen, though I could see an expensive-looking infant carrier sitting on one of the chairs, blankets and toys spilling out of a designer diaper bag beside it. "He's sleeping," Lorenzo said without turning around, as if he'd sensed my question. My driver took him to the car. He was exhausted from crying. The words hit like an accusation, though his tone remained neutral. I stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind me, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I don't understand," I said, because it seemed like the only safe thing to say. "He called me. Mateo shouldn't even know me." Lorenzo turned then, and the full force of his attention made me want to step back. He'd been magnetic 2 years ago, all barely contained intensity and dark charisma. Now there was something harder in him, something that suggested he'd seen things and done things that had stripped away whatever softness he might have once possessed. "No," he agreed quietly. "He shouldn't. His mother died in childbirth. Or so I was told." The room tilted slightly. I reached for the back of a chair to steady myself. "Told? What do you mean, told?" Lorenzo moved toward me with the fluid grace of a predator, stopping just close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. Up close, I could see the faint scar on his cheekbone was relatively fresh, still pink at the edges. Someone had hurt him. Recently. "I mean," he said, each word dropping like a stone into still water, "that 12 hours after my son was born, I received a phone call telling me the surrogate had hemorrhaged and died. That Mateo was healthy, but his mother was gone. That all the arrangements had been handled, the body cremated per her wishes, the death certificate filed. I never saw her, never said goodbye, never questioned it because I was too consumed with keeping my newborn son alive." My mind raced, trying to piece together what he was telling me. "Surrogate? Lorenzo, I was never—" "No," he interrupted, his voice hardening. "You weren't. Because the woman I hired as a surrogate, the woman who was supposed to carry my child because I wanted an heir but had no desire for a wife, that woman was 5'2", blonde, and had blue eyes." His gaze traveled over my face, cataloging features. "You're 5'7", dark-haired, with eyes the color of honey. You are nothing like the woman I paid $100,000 to carry my child." The implications crashed over me like a wave. "But Mateo has your eyes," Lorenzo said flatly. "I noticed it in the hospital, but I attributed it to chance. Recessive genes. My mother had brown eyes." He stepped closer, invading my space in a way that should have felt threatening, but instead felt inevitable. "Until today, when my son looked at you and called you Mama, despite never having seen you before in his conscious life. Until I saw your face when he said it, the way you went white, the way your hands shook. You weren't just surprised, Ava. You were terrified." "I thought I'd lost him," I whispered, the truth dragging itself out of me despite my better judgment. 2 years ago, after that night with you, I found out I was pregnant. I didn't know what to do. I was barely surviving the divorce. I had no money, no support system. And then there was a car accident, and my ex-husband told me I'd lost the baby. I believed him. Something dangerous flickered in Lorenzo's expression. The ex-husband. Name. Why? Name. Ava. The command in his voice brooked no argument. David Morelli. But he couldn't have. Couldn't have what? Lorenzo pressed. Lied to you? Manipulated you? Saw an opportunity to hurt you in the cruelest way possible? He pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. Or maybe couldn't have known that the woman he claimed was dead had just delivered a child that a desperate criminal was willing to pay 6 figures for. No questions asked. Horror washed over me in cold waves. No. Lorenzo, no. David was vindictive, but he wasn't. He wouldn't sell. A baby? Lorenzo finished, his smile razor-sharp and utterly humorless. People sell much worse for much less, Tesoro. And a private adoption to a wealthy man with the connections to make all the paperwork disappear? That's worth considerably more than 100,000. My knees gave out. I sank into the chair I'd been gripping, my mind refusing to accept what he was suggesting. That David had known I'd survived the accident, had known the baby had survived, had somehow arranged to sell our child to the highest bidder, and then told me my baby was dead to cover his tracks. I need proof, I heard myself say. I need a DNA test, medical records, something. Agreed. Lorenzo crouched in front of me, bringing himself to my eye level. At this distance, I could smell his cologne, something expensive with notes of bergamot and cedar. It triggered memories I'd worked hard to suppress. His skin against mine, his breath at my throat, the way he'd held me afterward like I was something precious rather than a one-night mistake. But understand this, Ava, he continued, his voice dropping lower. If Mateo is yours, and I believe he is, then you're about to enter a world you've spent 2 years running from. Because I don't share custody. I don't do weekend visitation or awkward holiday arrangements. My son lives with me, in my home, under my protection. And if you want to be part of his life, you're going to have to accept that your life as you know it is over. I have a life, I protested weakly. A boyfriend, classes, a job. You have a fantasy, Lorenzo corrected, not unkindly. A safe little existence you've built on the foundation of believing your child was dead. But he's not dead, Ava. He's alive, and he's mine. And now, if the DNA confirms what we both already know, he's yours too. So the question becomes, what are you willing to sacrifice to be his mother? Everything, I thought immediately. Anything. But I couldn't say it out loud. Couldn't admit to this man who radiated danger and power that I would give up Ethan, my classes, my carefully reconstructed life, everything I'd fought so hard to build, for a child I'd only just learned was still alive. I need time, I said instead. You have 48 hours, Lorenzo replied, standing. In 48 hours, I'll have the DNA results, and then we'll talk about what comes next. He pulled a card from his wallet and set it on the table between us. My private number. Call me day or night. I'll have someone watching you, so don't bother trying to run. It's for your protection as much as surveillance. Protection from what? His smile was cold. From whoever orchestrated this. From David, if he decides you're a liability. From anyone who might want to use you to get to me or to Mateo. He headed for the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. And Ava, whatever you decide, know this. I've spent 10 months being a father to a son I believed had no mother. I'm good at it. Mateo is loved, protected, provided for. You walked away once, or you were forced away, which is a distinction I intend to uncover. But if you walk away now, knowing he's alive, knowing he's yours, you don't get to come back. This is your one chance. He left me sitting alone in the private dining room, surrounded by the detritus of the lunch service and the ruins of everything I'd believed about my life. Through the window, I watched a black Mercedes pull away from the curb, windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. But I knew Lorenzo was in there, and Mateo, and the future I'd thought I'd lost. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Still on for dinner tonight? Can't wait to see you." I stared at the message for a long moment, thinking about how I'd met Ethan at a coffee shop near campus, how he'd been patient and kind, and everything David hadn't been, how he'd helped me believe I could have a normal life, a safe life, a life where my worst trauma was failing an anatomy quiz. But there was no going back to normal. Not now. I typed out a response. Something came up. "Can we talk later?" Then I picked up Lorenzo's card and stared at the embossed numbers, wondering if I had the courage to call them, wondering what I would say if I did. The answer came from somewhere deep and primal, the same place that had recognized Matteo the moment his eyes had met mine. My son was alive, and I would tear down heaven and earth to be part of his life, no matter what it cost me. I called the number on Lorenzo's card at 2:47 a.m., sitting on the floor of my bathroom with my back against the cold tub, unable to sleep for the third night in a row. He answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the hour, as if he'd been waiting. "Ava, I need to know everything," I said, my voice hoarse from the crying I'd done in sporadic bursts throughout the evening. "About the surrogate, about what happened, about how my son ended up in your arms instead of mine." There was a pause, and I heard movement on his end. Sheets rustling, footsteps on hardwood floors. "I'll send a car in 20 minutes. "Lorenzo, it's almost 3 in the morning. 20 minutes? Unless you want to have this conversation over the phone?" I didn't. Some instinct told me I needed to see his face when he explained how my child had been stolen from me. "I'll be ready." Ethan had called 4 times that evening. I'd let each call go to voicemail, unable to find words that wouldn't sound insane. "Hi, honey. Remember how I told you I'd had a miscarriage 2 years ago? Funny story. Turns out my baby was actually sold to a mafia boss, and I just found out he's alive." There was no version of that conversation that ended well. The black Mercedes arrived exactly 20 minutes later. The driver, a man built like a linebacker who introduced himself simply as Tony, held the door open with professional courtesy that felt at odds with the gun I could see holstered under his jacket. We drove north out of the city, the streets empty at this hour except for the occasional cab and late-night delivery truck. I watched the familiar landscape of my neighborhood give way to increasingly upscale areas, the buildings growing taller and more expensive until we turned onto Lakeshore Drive, where the city's wealthy kept their fortresses overlooking the water. Lorenzo's building was all glass and steel, the kind of place where the doorman wore a better suit than most CEOs. Tony escorted me through a lobby that looked like a modern art museum, all marble and minimalist furniture, to a private elevator that required a key card to operate. "Mr. Valente is expecting you," Tony said, handing me the card. "Penthouse. The elevator will take you directly." The ride up felt endless, my reflection in the polished elevator walls showing a woman who looked haunted, her hair still damp from the shower I'd taken to wake myself up, dressed in jeans and an oversized sweater because I'd been too rattled to care about appearances. The elevator opened directly into Lorenzo's penthouse, and for a moment, I could only stare. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Lake Michigan, the water black and vast under the starless sky. The interior was all clean lines and expensive simplicity. Leather furniture in shades of cream and gray. Abstract art on the walls that probably cost more than I'd earn in 5 years. Recessed lighting that created pools of warmth in the cavernous space. Lorenzo stood by the windows, wearing black pants and a white undershirt, barefoot, looking more human than I'd ever seen him. His hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd run his hands through it repeatedly, and there were shadows under his eyes that suggested he'd slept as poorly as I had. "Coffee?" he asked without preamble. "Please." I followed him to an open kitchen that belonged in a magazine spread, all gleaming stainless steel and black granite. He moved with easy competence, grinding beans and operating an espresso machine that looked complex enough to require an engineering degree. The domesticity of it felt surreal. This man who controlled an empire, making coffee at 3 a.m. for the woman who'd unknowingly borne his child. "Mateo's asleep," he said, nodding toward a hallway that presumably led to bedrooms. "My nanny stays in the guest suite when I need her, but I sent her home tonight. Didn't want anyone else hearing this conversation." He handed me a cup of perfect espresso in a delicate china cup, then gestured toward the leather sectional. I sat, curling my legs under me, inhaling the bitter-rich aroma while my hands absorbed the cup's warmth. Lorenzo sat across from me, close enough to talk quietly, but far enough to not crowd me. 2.5 years ago, he began without preamble. My father was killed, ambushed leaving his club on a Tuesday night, shot 6 times in the street like a dog. His voice remained steady, but something tightened around his eyes. I was 31 years old, and suddenly I was responsible for everything he'd built. Every business, every obligation, every enemy. I sipped my coffee and said nothing, sensing he needed to tell this his way. I wasn't married, had no desire to be, but I wanted a son. Someone to carry on the family name, to eventually take over when I was gone. He smiled without humor. Sounds medieval, I know. But in my world, legacy matters. So I went through an agency, found a surrogate, paid her extremely well, and made arrangements for a child I would raise alone. "The surrogate you thought was carrying Mateo," I said. "Sarah Chen, 23 years old, college student, healthy medical history. She came highly recommended by the agency, had done this once before for another client." Lorenzo set his cup down with careful precision. "Or so the paperwork said. I met with her twice, once for the initial consultation, once after the pregnancy was confirmed. We weren't supposed to have contact after that, per the contract. The agency handled all medical appointments, payments, everything." "But it wasn't really her," I said, understanding beginning to dawn. "Someone substituted me." "Someone substituted you," Lorenzo agreed. "And I didn't know until today when my son called you Mama, and I saw my own eyes looking back at me from your face." I set my cup down before I dropped it, my hands suddenly shaking too hard to hold anything. "But how? How did they even know I was pregnant? How did they—" I stopped, realization hitting like a physical blow. David knew. He was there when I found out, when I had the ultrasound. Oh God, he must have— "I have people looking into David Morelli," Lorenzo said quietly. "His financials, his movements around the time of your accident and Mateo's birth. We'll know soon what role he played." "And the real surrogate, Sarah Chen?" Something dark crossed Lorenzo's face. "My men located her yesterday. She's living in Portland under a different name, with a daughter who'll be 3 in December. When my people showed her Mateo's photo, she confirmed she'd never seen him before. Said the agency had called her 8 months into the pregnancy, told her the intended parents had changed their minds, and decided to go with a different surrogate. Paid her the full amount plus extra for her trouble. She delivered a baby girl to different clients and never questioned it." "So someone orchestrated the entire thing," I said slowly. "Swapped her out for me, delivered my baby to you, told you the mother died, and told me my baby died. And profited considerably from all sides," Lorenzo added. "The question is who? David alone couldn't have pulled this off. He'd need connections to the agency, to the hospital, to the people who filed the death certificate and arranged the cremation of a body that didn't exist." I thought about the weeks after the accident, the fog of pain medications and grief. I'd been in the hospital for 5 days with a concussion and broken ribs. I'd signed paperwork I barely read, been visited by people whose faces I couldn't remember. Had one of them been from the agency? Had someone taken advantage of my vulnerability to complete their plan? "Why not just tell me?" I asked, anger finally cutting through the shock. "Why not offer to buy my baby outright? I was desperate, broke, terrified, They could have approached me legally. Because you might have said no, Lorenzo interrupted. Or worse, said yes and then changed your mind. This way was cleaner, permanent. No mother to show up later wanting custody or more money. His gaze was steady, unflinching. And perhaps because whoever orchestrated this knew that I would never knowingly take a child from its mother against her will. I'm not a good man, Ava, but I have lines I don't cross. Children are one of them. The vulnerability in that admission made my throat tight. Tell me about him, I said softly. Tell me about Matteo. What I missed. Lorenzo's entire demeanor shifted, hardness giving way to something gentler. He was 6 pounds, 4 ounces, born 3 weeks early, but healthy. He had jaundice the first week, had to stay under lights, but he fought through it. A smile ghosted across his lips. He's stubborn. Gets that from both of us, I think. I laughed, a sound dangerously close to a sob. He started sleeping through the night at 4 months. Loves music. Classical, opera, anything with strings. He'll stop crying if I play Puccini. Lorenzo pulled out his phone, swiping through photos. He took his first steps 2 weeks ago. Early, the pediatrician said. He's in the 95th percentile for height and weight. Smart, too. Already babbling in what sounds almost like words. He handed me the phone, and I scrolled through images that made my heart ache. Matteo in a bathtub, covered in bubbles and grinning. Matteo sleeping on Lorenzo's bare chest, both of them peaceful. Matteo in a high chair, face covered in what looked like pureed sweet potato. Matteo, Matteo, Matteo. 10 months of life I'd missed, captured in pixels and light. You're a good father, I whispered. I try to be. Lorenzo took the phone back, his fingers brushing mine. But he needs his mother, Ava. I see it every day. The way he watches women in the park. How he reaches for my sister when she visits. There's something missing, and I couldn't give it to him no matter how hard I tried. He met my eyes. Until yesterday, when he looked at you and knew. However that's possible. Whatever instinct or memory or genetic recognition exists, he knew you. The DNA test, I said. When will we have results? Tomorrow afternoon. I had a friend who's a doctor run it personally. Expedited processing, completely confidential. He paused. But we both know what it will say. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of everything pressing down. Finally, I asked the question that had been haunting me. What happens now? After we confirm I'm his mother? Lorenzo leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression serious. That depends on what you want, Ava. I meant what I said. I don't do custody arrangements. Matteo lives here with me under my protection. That's non-negotiable. You expect me to just walk away? No. His gaze was steady. I expect you to move in. The words hung in the air between us. Lorenzo. Hear me out, he interrupted. You would have your own suite, your own space, complete privacy. You could continue your classes, though I'd prefer you quit the restaurant. Matteo needs stability, routine, and having his mother disappear for 8-hour shifts isn't fair to him or you. I'll cover your tuition, your living expenses, everything. In exchange for what? I asked, hearing the bitterness in my voice. I become your kept woman? Your convenient co-parent while you, what, continue with your life, your business, your other women? Something flashed in his eyes. There are no other women. There haven't been since before Matteo was born. I have no time, and less interest. He stood, began pacing. As for what I expect in exchange, I expect you to be a mother to our son. To love him, care for him, help me raise him. That's all. That's everything, I countered. My whole life, Lorenzo. My independence, my relationship with Ethan, my carefully planned future. Plans change, he said flatly. You thought your son was dead. He's not. That changes everything, whether you want it to or not. I stood too, needing to match his energy. And what about the danger? You said yourself there are people who might use me to get to you. Am I supposed to just accept that? Accept armed guards and surveillance and... Yes, he interrupted, his voice hard. Because the alternative is, I can't let you be part of Mateo's life. I will not risk my son, Ava. Not for your comfort, not for your feelings about your independence, not for anything. If you want to be his mother, you accept the protection that comes with it. We stood facing each other, the air crackling with tension. Finally, I whispered, I need to think about it. You have until the DNA results come back, Lorenzo said. After that, you decide, in or out, mother or stranger. There's no middle ground. Tony drove me home as dawn was breaking over the city, the sky turning from black to gray to pale gold. I climbed the 3 flights to my studio apartment, let myself in, and found Ethan asleep on my couch, still in his work clothes from the day before. He woke when I closed the door, blinking up at me with concern. Ava. Jesus, where were you? I've been calling... I know. I'm sorry. I sank onto the couch beside him, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. Ethan, we need to talk. The DNA results came back at 2:17 p.m. the next day, delivered to my phone in a text from Lorenzo that contained no words, just a PDF attachment. I opened it sitting in my nursing fundamentals class, the words swimming before my eyes as the professor droned on about vital signs and patient assessment. Probability of maternity, 99. 997% I'd known. Of course I'd known. But seeing it confirmed in clinical black and white made it undeniably, terrifyingly real. Mateo was mine. My son, the child I'd been grieving for 2 years, was alive and waiting for an answer I still didn't know how to give. My phone buzzed again. Lorenzo, I'll pick you up after your class. We need to talk. Don't bring the boyfriend. The presumption should have angered me. Instead, I felt a strange sort of relief. Ethan and I had spent the previous evening in my apartment, me trying and failing to explain what was happening, him growing increasingly confused and hurt. He'd left around midnight, saying he needed time to process, his expression making it clear that what he really meant was that he couldn't process it, couldn't understand how the woman he'd been dating had suddenly inherited a child with a dangerous man from her past. I texted back, fine, but neutral ground, not your place. The response was immediate. Grant Park, southeast corner, by the fountain. 1 hour. I barely absorbed the rest of the lecture, my mind churning through possibilities and impossibilities. Moving in with Lorenzo meant giving up everything I'd built. My independence, my relationship, my hard-won sense of safety. But staying away meant abandoning my son to be raised without his mother. Meant missing every first and milestone. Meant choosing my own comfort over his need. There was no good choice, only impossible ones. Lorenzo was waiting when I arrived, leaning against the fountain's marble edge, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Tony stood a discreet distance away, pretending to check his phone while clearly monitoring the surroundings. 2 other men I recognized from the restaurant lingered near different paths, creating a perimeter of security that was both obvious and unsettling. You're late, Lorenzo observed as I approached. Traffic, I lied. In truth, I'd walked the long way, needing the extra time to prepare myself for this conversation. He studied me for a moment, then gestured to a bench sheltered by trees, away from the main walking paths. We sat, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. Joggers passed, tourists took photos of the skyline, pigeons pecked at scattered crumbs. Normalcy surrounding the moment that would define the rest of my life. I've had my lawyers draw up papers, Lorenzo said finally. Nothing official, nothing that would go through the courts, but an agreement between us about custody, access, how we'll share Mateo's upbringing. Share, I repeated. As long as sharing means me living in your home, under your rules, with your permission to see my own son. His jaw tightened. You're framing this as a prison. It's not. You'd have your own wing of the penthouse, complete privacy. Your own entrance if you want it. You could come and go as you please. With guards following me everywhere. I interrupted. For your protection, he insisted. Ava, you don't understand the world I operate in. There are people who would use you to hurt me, to get to Mateo. The moment you're publicly acknowledged as his mother, you become a target. Then don't acknowledge me publicly, I countered. Let me be part of his life quietly. I'll come visit, spend time with him, but maintain my own life outside your world. Lorenzo's laugh was harsh. And what happens when Mateo gets old enough to question why his mother doesn't live with him? Why she visits like a distant relative instead of being present? You think that won't damage him? I had no answer for that because he was right. What about Ethan? I asked instead. If I move in with you, what am I supposed to tell him? The truth. Lorenzo's gaze was steady. That your son needs you, and you're choosing to be his mother. If he loves you, he'll understand. He won't, I said quietly. He'll see it as me choosing you. Moving into your home, into your world. Even if nothing is happening between us, the optics... Then let him go, Lorenzo interrupted, his voice harder. If he can't accept that you're a mother first, if he can't understand what you're sacrificing to be present in Mateo's life, then he's not worth keeping. The casualness with which he dismissed my relationship stung. You don't get to make that decision for me. I'm not. You are. He turned to face me more fully, his expression intense. But understand this. Ava, I will make every argument, apply every pressure, use every advantage I have to convince you to choose Mateo. Because he deserves to have his mother, and I will not let your fear or pride or misguided loyalty to a man you barely know keep you from him. Barely know? I bristled. I've been dating Ethan for 8 months. We've built a relationship based on honesty and trust. Based on a lie, Lorenzo corrected coldly. Because you never told him about that night with me. You never told him you'd been pregnant, that you'd mourned a child you thought was dead. How honest is a relationship built on omission? The words struck too close to truth. Ethan and I had a good relationship, but it was built on the person I'd presented myself as, a woman who'd survived a bad marriage and was rebuilding her life. I'd never shared the darker parts, the messier parts, the parts that included a one-night stand with a stranger that had resulted in a pregnancy. I was protecting myself, I said weakly. And now you have to choose, Lorenzo replied. Protect yourself or protect our son. You can't do both. A woman walking her dog passed nearby, and Lorenzo fell silent until she was out of earshot. The casual paranoia, the constant awareness of who might be listening. This was the world I'd be entering, I realized, where even conversations in public required vigilance. Tell me about the threats, I said abruptly. The people who might come after me. I need to know what I'm risking. Lorenzo's expression remained neutral, but I caught a flicker of something. Approval, maybe, that I was asking the right questions. My family's businesses, legitimate and otherwise, make enemies. Rivals who want our territory, law enforcement who want evidence, politicians who want leverage. Most threats are manageable, contained through diplomacy or shows of strength. But occasionally, someone gets desperate or stupid enough to go after families. Has anyone ever... I couldn't finish the question. 3 years ago, my sister was followed home from work. My father's men intervened before anything happened, but it was close. His voice remained even, but his hands had curled into fists. That's when I began insisting she move into a secure building, that she accept full-time security. She fought it, said she wanted a normal life. Until the day she found photos of her son slipped under her apartment door. Photos taken from inside his daycare. Proof that someone could get to him whenever they wanted. Horror washed through me. What did you do? What needed to be done? The coldness in his voice made clear I didn't want details. The point is, Ava, I don't make these demands for control. I make them for survival. Your survival, Mateo's survival. If you're going to be part of his life, you accept the protection that comes with it. I stood, needing to move, to process. I walked to the fountain's edge, staring into the water where pennies glinted at the bottom. Thousands of wishes made by people who believed in luck and fate and intervention by forces beyond their control. I'll do it, I heard myself say. Lorenzo was beside me in an instant. You'll move in? On my terms. I turned to face him, channeling every ounce of strength I had left. I want my own space, my own entrance, my own keys. I continue my nursing classes. The tuition help I'll accept, but I finish the program on my own merit. I see Ethan if I want to, though. I paused, acknowledging the truth I'd been avoiding, though I suspect that relationship is already over. What else? Lorenzo asked, his expression unreadable. Transparency about the danger. I need to know when there's a threat, how serious it is, what you're doing about it. No, don't worry about it or let me handle it. If my life is at risk, I deserve to know. He nodded. Agreed. And time with Mateo on my own, without you hovering. He needs to bond with me, to know me as his mother, not just as your. I gestured vaguely. My what? Lorenzo's voice held a challenge. I don't know what we are, I admitted. Former lovers? Co-parents? Forced allies? But whatever we are, Mateo needs to know me as separate from you. He's 10 months old, Ava. He needs both of us, together, providing consistency and stability. But yes, time alone with you is fine, once you've settled in and he's comfortable. When? I asked. When do you want me to move in? Tomorrow. At my expression, he added, Your lease is month to month. I'll handle the rent through the end, have your belongings moved professionally, compensate your landlord for any inconvenience. You've already been planning this, I realized, before you even had the DNA results. I was 99% certain, Lorenzo admitted. The test just confirmed it. And yes, I've been planning. It's what I do, Ava. Anticipate, prepare, ensure outcomes that favor my interests. In this case, our interests align. You want to be Mateo's mother. I want him to have his mother. The logistics are just details. The casual way he organized life, moved pieces around like a chess game, should have terrified me. Instead, I felt an odd sense of security. Lorenzo was a man who made things happen, who protected what was his, who had kept our son safe and healthy and loved for 10 months without any help from me. I need to talk to Ethan, I said. Face to face. He deserves that much. Tonight, Lorenzo agreed. And then tomorrow we'll bring you home. Home. The word echoed strangely. My studio apartment had never felt like home. Just a way station, a temporary refuge while I figured out what came next. But Lorenzo's penthouse wasn't home either. It was a gilded cage, however spacious and well-appointed. Maybe home wasn't a place anymore. Maybe it was wherever Mateo was, this child I'd carried and mourned and lost and found again. Maybe home was learning to be a mother under impossible circumstances, to a son I barely knew, alongside a man who was equal parts dangerous and devoted. Okay, I said quietly. Tomorrow. Lorenzo's hand found mine, his fingers warm and surprisingly gentle. "You're doing the right thing, Ava, for Matteo and for yourself. I know it doesn't feel like it now, but in time—" "Don't," I interrupted, pulling my hand away. "Don't try to convince me this is anything other than what it is. I'm not moving in because I want to. I'm moving in because my son needs me, and I can't be a mother to him from a distance. But let's not pretend this is some happy ending." "It's not an ending at all," Lorenzo replied. "It's a beginning. What we make of it is up to us." The penthouse felt different when I moved in 3 days later. Less like a museum and more like a fortress, its luxury now tinged with purpose. My suite occupied the entire east wing. A bedroom larger than my old apartment, a sitting room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a bathroom with a soaking tub that could fit 3 people. Lorenzo had stocked the closet with clothes in my size, the bathroom with products I'd mentioned using once in passing. The attention to detail was either thoughtful or invasive, depending on my mood. Matteo's nursery sat between my rooms and Lorenzo's, a neutral zone we'd both have equal access to. I'd spent my first night listening to the monitor, heart clenching every time my son made a sound, resisting the urge to run in and check on him. Lorenzo had given me space, but I'd felt his presence through the walls, knew he was awake too, adjusting to this new normal. The conversation with Ethan had gone as badly as I'd feared. He'd listened to my explanation in silence, his expression moving through confusion to hurt to something harder. "You're choosing to live with him," he'd said finally. "This man you barely know, this criminal, over us." "I'm choosing my son," I'd corrected, but we both knew it was more complicated than that. Ethan had left my apartment for the last time that night, and I'd let him go without fighting, knowing he deserved someone whose life wasn't built on fractured foundations and impossible choices. Now, 2 weeks into my new life, I was learning the rhythms of Lorenzo's world. He rose early, always in the gym by 6, conducting business from his home office until Matteo woke around 7:30. I'd started joining them for breakfast, awkward at first, but gradually finding a rhythm. Matteo had warmed to me with the adaptability of babies, reaching for me now with the same trust he showed Lorenzo. "He needs a bath," Lorenzo said one evening, Matteo covered in sweet potato from dinner. "Would you like to—" "Yes," I said immediately, reaching for my son. This was the 4th time I'd bathed him, and it still felt miraculous, this ordinary act of motherhood I'd thought I'd never experience. Lorenzo showed me to the nursery bathroom, because of course there was an ensuite bathroom just for the baby, and I found everything laid out with military precision. Towels, soap, toys, fresh pajamas. I ran the water to the perfect temperature, testing it repeatedly, then settled Matteo into the small tub. He giggled as I washed his hair, his small hands slapping the water, sending up splashes that soaked my shirt. "You think that's funny?" I murmured, laughing myself. "Wait until you're old enough for bath paint." "Bath paint?" Lorenzo's voice came from the doorway. I glanced up to find him leaning against the frame, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Special soap that comes in colors. You can paint the tub, the walls, yourself. My cousin's kids loved it. Order some," he said simply. "Matteo should have that. Matteo should have that." It was becoming a refrain. Whatever normal childhood experience I mentioned, Lorenzo immediately arranged. Books, music classes, a membership to the Children's Museum. He was trying to give our son everything, as if enough money and attention could make up for the irregularity of his parentage. "He doesn't need everything," I said, lifting Matteo from the tub and wrapping him in a hooded towel that made him look like a tiny bear. "He just needs us." "He has us," Lorenzo replied, "but he should have everything else too." I carried Matteo to his nursery and laid him on the changing table, working through the familiar routine of diaper and pajamas while he babbled and grabbed at my hair. Lorenzo appeared with a bottle, and we performed our evening choreography, me holding Matteo, Lorenzo offering the bottle, our hands touching briefly as our son drank, eyes growing heavy. Tell me about your family, I said quietly, the question I'd been wondering for weeks. Matteo's other grandparents, aunts, uncles. What do they know about me? Lorenzo's expression shuddered slightly. My sister, Francesca, knows everything. She helped me search for you after I thought the surrogate had died. She was the one who suggested something wasn't right about the whole situation. And your parents? Dead. My mother 10 years ago, cancer. My father 3 years ago, bullets. He said it flatly, without emotion. My brother was killed in the same ambush that took my father. God, Lorenzo, I'm sorry. Don't be. It's the life we chose. He watched as Matteo's eyes finally closed, his small body going heavy with sleep. But Francesca wants to meet you. She's been asking daily when you'll be ready for visitors. The idea of meeting Lorenzo's family, of being scrutinized, judged, measured against whatever standards they held for the mother of the Valente heir, made my stomach clench with anxiety. Soon, I hedged. This weekend, Lorenzo said, not a request. She's bringing Marco, her husband, and their son. Family dinner. I transferred Matteo to his crib, adjusting his position with a gentleness that still felt foreign and wonderful. You could have asked me. I could have, Lorenzo agreed, following me out of the nursery, pulling the door mostly closed behind us. But then you would have found reasons to delay. Francesca has been patient long enough. We stood in the hallway between our respective domains, close enough that I could smell his cologne, see the faint stubble along his jaw that appeared by evening. The air between us felt charged with something I didn't want to examine. I should go study, I said, stepping back. I have an exam Monday. Ava. His hand caught my wrist, gentle but firm. We need to discuss something. The seriousness in his tone made my pulse jump. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, but there's been a development. He guided me toward his office, a space I'd avoided since moving in, the nerve center of his legitimate and illegitimate operations. My people found David. I sank into the leather chair across from his desk, my legs suddenly weak. Where? Phoenix. He's been there since about a month after Matteo was born, living under an alias. Lorenzo pulled up something on his computer, turning the screen to show me. Photos of my ex-husband, slightly thinner, hair longer, coming out of an apartment building. He received $200,000 in payments over 4 months during your pregnancy. The money was wired from an offshore account registered to a shell corporation. Who owns the corporation? That's what my people are working to uncover. Lorenzo's expression was grim. But it's connected to the surrogacy agency, the same one I used. Someone there orchestrated the entire thing, swapped out the real surrogate, delivered your baby to me, arranged for the fake death certificate, and paid David handsomely for his cooperation. Rage, hot and clean, cut through my shock. I want to talk to him. Absolutely not. Lorenzo. No, Ava. His voice turned hard. David is dangerous to you. He sold your child, took money to fake your baby's death, and has been living off that blood money for nearly a year. If he knows you're alive and with me, if he realizes you've connected to Matteo, he becomes a liability. And desperate men do desperate things. Then what? I demanded. You're just going to... What? Make him disappear? Kill him? I'm going to ensure he never threatens you or Matteo again, Lorenzo said flatly. How I accomplish that is not your concern. I stood, fury giving me courage. The hell it isn't. He's my ex-husband. This is my life, my son. You don't get to make these decisions without me. We stood facing each other across his desk, two wills colliding. Finally, Lorenzo said, What do you want me to do, Ava? Bring him here so you can ask him why. So you can hear him justify what he did? Will that give you closure? I want justice, I said quietly. Real justice, not whatever vigilante solution you're planning. Justice. Lorenzo's laugh was bitter. David stole a child from its mother and sold him for profit. In what universe does justice exist for that crime? You want to go to the police? Explain that your baby wasn't dead? That he was sold to a mafia boss? That everyone involved broke a dozen laws? You'd be opening yourself to investigation, to having Matteo taken away while they sort out the legality of his parentage. I hadn't thought of that. Then what do you suggest? I suggest you let me handle it, Lorenzo said, his voice softening slightly. I suggest you trust that I will ensure David never hurts you again, and that you don't ask questions about the details. I can't do that, I whispered. I can't just... Lorenzo, I'm not built for this world. I can't turn off my conscience. Can't pretend that violence is justice. He moved around the desk, standing close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. Then don't. Keep your conscience clean, Ava. Be the light in Matteo's life, the good influence that balances out the darkness of mine. But let me be the darkness. Let me do what needs to be done so you don't have to. The offer was seductive in its simplicity. Let Lorenzo handle the ugly parts, the violent parts, while I focused on being a mother. But accepting that meant accepting him, accepting his methods, accepting that the man raising my son was capable of terrible things. I need time, I said finally. You don't have it, Lorenzo replied. David is a loose end. The longer he's out there, the more danger he presents. To you, to Matteo, to all of us. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize, but a Phoenix area code. My blood ran cold as I looked at Lorenzo, who'd clearly seen it too. Don't answer it, he commanded, but I was already swiping to accept, some reckless instinct taking over. Hello? Ava. David's voice, unchanged, still carrying that particular tone of condescension I remembered too well. We need to talk about our son. Lorenzo's hand shot out, hitting the speaker button, his expression murderous. I don't have a son, I said, my voice shaking. You told me he died. And yet I hear you've been living with Lorenzo Valente for the past 2 weeks, David replied smoothly. Funny how that works out. The baby I sold him turns out to be yours. Small world. You son of a... $5 million, David interrupted. That's what it'll cost for me to go away permanently. To never contact you, never tell anyone the real story of how Valente got his kid. $5 million, and your secret stays safe. Lorenzo's voice was deadly calm. David Morelli, do you have any idea who you're trying to extort? A pause, then nervous laughter. Valente, didn't realize you were listening. Look, this is business, nothing personal. I have information you want kept quiet. You have money. It's a simple transaction. No, Lorenzo said softly. What's simple is that you have 48 hours to get your affairs in order. After that, you won't need money anymore. You won't need anything. He ended the call, then immediately made another. Marco, David Morelli just called. I'm sending you his location. I want him found, and I want him brought here, alive. We're going to have a conversation. He listened for a moment. I don't care what you have to do. Get it done. I stared at him, horror and a dark satisfaction warring inside me. You're going to kill him. I'm going to make sure he never threatens my family again, Lorenzo corrected. What happens beyond that depends on him. Lorenzo. Go be with Matteo, he interrupted, his voice gentler now. This isn't something you need to see or know about. Please, Ava, for once, just let me protect you. I fled to the nursery where our son slept peacefully, unaware that his father was about to commit violence on his behalf, that his mother was complicit through her silence. I sank into the rocking chair and let the tears come. Mourning not David. God knew he deserved whatever Lorenzo had planned. But the woman I'd been, the one who'd believed in clean justice and moral absolutes. That woman was dying, I realized. And in her place, a harder version was emerging. One who could live in Lorenzo's world, who could balance love for her son with acceptance of his father's methods. One who was beginning to understand that sometimes the only justice available was the kind you took yourself. They brought David to the penthouse 3 days later, in the middle of the night, when Matteo was sleeping, and I was supposed to be as well. But I'd been awake, studying for my pharmacology exam, when I heard the commotion from Lorenzo's side of the penthouse. Voices, movement, and then a sound that made my blood run cold. Someone begging. I should have stayed in my room, should have put on headphones and turned up the volume, maintained plausible deniability about whatever was happening. Instead, I found myself padding barefoot down the hallway, drawn by morbid curiosity and a need to see David face the consequences of what he'd done. Lorenzo's office door was closed, but I could hear voices through it. I pressed myself against the wall nearby, hidden in shadow, listening, trying to be reasonable here. That was David, his voice strained but still carrying that note of entitlement I remembered. I made a mistake. I was in debt, desperate. They offered me money, a lot of money, and I took it. But I never meant for anyone to get hurt. You told a woman her child was dead. Lorenzo's voice was quiet, deadly. You let her grieve for nearly 2 years while you lived off the money you made selling her baby. Explain to me how that's not intending to hurt someone. She was better off not knowing. She couldn't take care of a kid. She could barely take care of herself. I did her a favor. The slap echoed clearly, even through the door. Then Lorenzo's voice, colder than I'd ever heard it. You will not speak about her that way. Jesus Christ, Valente. I didn't know she was going to end up with you. I didn't know the kid was going to end up being yours. It was supposed to be clean. She'd never know. You'd never know. Everyone wins. Except my son, who spent the first months of his life without his mother, Lorenzo said. Except Ava, who spent 2 years mourning a child she thought was dead. Who was the winner in that scenario, David? Silence. Then, look, I'll go away. You don't have to pay me, I'll just disappear. You never hear from me again, I swear. You're right about that part. I heard movement, a struggle, David's voice rising in panic. Wait, please. I'll tell you everything. The agency who set it up, all of it. Just don't talk, Lorenzo commanded, and make it convincing. What followed was a confession that made my blood run cold. David described how he'd been approached by someone from the surrogacy agency shortly after my accident, while I was still in the hospital. They'd known about the pregnancy, had access to medical records they shouldn't have had. They'd offered him $200,000 to cooperate with their plan, tell me the baby had died, sign paperwork claiming I was mentally unstable and unable to make decisions, allow them to take custody of the newborn. Why did they want my baby specifically? Lorenzo's voice cut through David's rambling explanation. Because of the timing. The real surrogate, she went into early labor. Delivered 3 weeks before Ava. Her kid went to some couple in Seattle. But you were expecting a baby in 2 weeks, and suddenly they didn't have one to give you. So they found Ava. Her due date matched perfectly. And they made it work. By stealing a child, Lorenzo said flatly. By solving a problem, David corrected, then immediately seemed to realize his mistake. I mean, look, I'm not saying it was right, but from their perspective, you wanted a kid. You were paying a fortune for one, and here was a woman who couldn't afford to keep hers anyway. They saw it as killing 2 birds with 1 stone. And your role? I convinced Ava to use the agency's lawyer for custody paperwork, convinced her to sign things she didn't read carefully because she was on pain meds, made sure she stayed isolated so nobody would question why there was no funeral, no grave, nothing. And then I took the money and left. Names, Lorenzo demanded. Who at the agency coordinated this? David gave them up without hesitation. 3 names I didn't recognize but committed to memory anyway. Then Lorenzo asked the question I'd been dreading. How many other children were stolen this way? The pause that followed was damning. I don't know for sure, but based on what they told me, at least a dozen over the years. Maybe more. They had a whole system. Identify vulnerable mothers, stage complications or accidents, make the babies disappear into the homes of wealthy clients who didn't ask too many questions. I had to cover my mouth to keep from making a sound. A dozen children, a dozen families destroyed, a dozen mothers grieving losses that weren't real. And Lorenzo, had he known? Had he suspected? Where's the documentation? Lorenzo asked. Records, communications, evidence? I have copies, David said quickly, desperately. Insurance, you know. Everything is on a flash drive in a safety deposit box. I can get it for you. Show you everything. Just please, give me the location and access information. David complied, the words tumbling out in a rush. Then silence fell, heavy and expectant. What happens now? David asked, his voice small. Now, Lorenzo said quietly. You tell me one thing. Did you ever care about Ava? Even a little? Or was she always just a means to an end? Mathieu, the pause that followed told me everything I needed to know. I needed her insurance for my medical issues, David admitted finally. The marriage was convenient. When she filed for divorce, I was pissed because it messed up my coverage. The baby thing, the money, it was just good timing, a way to profit from a bad situation. I heard movement, and then Lorenzo's voice, softer now but somehow more frightening. I want you to understand something. The only reason you're alive right now is because Ava would be upset if I killed you. Not because she still cares about you. She doesn't. But because despite everything you've done, despite every reason she has to want you dead, she still has a conscience. She still believes in mercy, in second chances, in the justice system. So you're letting me go? No. The single word carried absolute finality. I'm turning you over to the FBI. Agent Sarah Chen has been investigating the surrogacy agency for trafficking violations. She'll be very interested in your confession and your flash drive. You'll spend the next 20 years in federal prison, minimum. Maybe more if they can connect you to the other stolen children. You can't? I'll tell them everything. About you, about your businesses, about... Please do, Lorenzo interrupted. Tell them whatever you want. By the time your case goes to trial, every piece of evidence linking me to anything criminal will have disappeared, and you'll just be a desperate man making wild accusations. Meanwhile, you'll be in a cell, David. Forever. I want a lawyer. You'll get one. After Agent Chen arrests you tomorrow morning when you're discovered trespassing on private property, high on cocaine, with child pornography on your phone. I would never, won't matter. The evidence will be there, planted by people who are very good at what they do. And even if you prove it's fake eventually, the stigma will follow you forever. In prison, men who hurt children don't last long. Lorenzo's voice dropped to a whisper I could barely hear. You should have just taken the money and disappeared, David. Now you get to live with the consequences. I heard doors opening, multiple voices. David being dragged away, still protesting. I fled back to my suite before I could be discovered, my heart racing, my mind reeling. Lorenzo was sending David to prison. Was going to frame him for unthinkable crimes to ensure he'd suffer. Was using the legal system as a weapon, perverting justice in the name of vengeance. And I couldn't bring myself to be sorry. I was still sitting in my darkened living room an hour later when a soft knock came at my door. I knew who it was before I opened it. Lorenzo stood in the hallway, still wearing the clothes from earlier, looking exhausted in a way I'd never seen. "You heard," he said. Not a question. Most of it. He nodded, unsurprised. And I should be horrified, I said quietly. I should be calling the police, turning you in for what you're planning to do to him. But I'm not. I'm relieved. Relieved? That he'll pay for what he did. That he won't be able to hurt anyone else. That you're the kind of man who... I trailed off, unsure how to finish. Lorenzo stepped into my space, his hand coming up to cut my face with surprising gentleness. "Who will do whatever it takes to protect you and Matteo," he finished. "Even the things that keep you up at night. Even the things that stain my soul. That's who I am, Ava. That's who I've always been." I should have pulled away. Should have maintained the careful distance we'd kept these past weeks. Instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, seeking the warmth and certainty he offered. "I'm not a good person anymore," I whispered. "The woman I was, who believed in truth and justice and doing things the right way. She's gone. And I don't know who I am now." "You're a mother," Lorenzo said simply. "You're Matteo's mother. And you'll do whatever it takes to keep him safe. That doesn't make you bad, Ava. That makes you human." "Is that what you tell yourself?" I asked. "That everything you do, all the violence and corruption and manipulation, it's justified because it protects your family?" "No." His thumb traced my cheekbone. "I tell myself that I'm damned regardless, so I might as well be damned for protecting the people I love." The word, love, hung between us, unexpected and terrifying. "Lorenzo." "I know," he interrupted. "I know this isn't what you signed up for, that you're here for Matteo, not for me. But I need you to understand something." He stepped closer, eliminating the last distance between us. "These past weeks, watching you with our son, seeing you in my home, in my life, I've started hoping for things I never let myself hope for before." "Don't," I whispered, even as my traitorous heart began to race. "This is complicated enough without..." "Without what?" "Without admitting that this," he gestured between us, "was always going to happen. That from the moment Matteo called you Mama, from the second I saw recognition in your eyes, we were always going to end up here. Here is my suite in your penthouse, with my ex-husband being framed for crimes he didn't commit, and our son sleeping down the hall. This isn't a romance, Lorenzo. This isn't fate or destiny or whatever you want to call it. This is survival." "Then survive with me," he said fiercely. "Not as my prisoner or my obligation, but as my partner. In raising Matteo, in building a life, in..." A cry from the nursery cut him off. Matteo, waking from a bad dream, his wails carrying clearly through the monitor. "I'll go," we said simultaneously. We walked together to the nursery, our shoulders brushing in the narrow hallway. Matteo stood in his crib, tears streaming down his face, arms reaching. I lifted him automatically, settling him against my chest, and his cries immediately softened to hiccuping sobs. Lorenzo's hand came to rest on Matteo's back, his other arm circling around me, and suddenly we were a unit, a family, standing in the soft glow of the nightlight, our son between us. "Mama," Matteo murmured, his small fist clutching my shirt. Then, drowsily, "Dada." Lorenzo's arm tightened around us, and I felt him press a kiss to the top of my head. "We're both here, Piccolo. You're safe." We stayed like that until Matteo drifted back to sleep, neither of us willing to break the moment. Finally, I laid him gently in the crib, and we stood watching him together, two people from different worlds who'd created this perfect, innocent life. "I can't promise I'll ever be comfortable with your methods, I said softly. I can't promise I won't question you, challenge you, fight you on the things you do. I wouldn't want you any other way, Lorenzo replied. But I can promise that I'm here. For Matteo and... I took a breath, acknowledging the truth I'd been fighting. And for you. Not because I have to be, but because I'm choosing to be. Lorenzo turned me to face him, his expression intense in the dim light. That's all I'm asking for, Ava. Your choice. Every day, choose us. Choose this family we're building, this life we're creating. And I swear to you, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it. What about the agency? I asked. The other stolen children? Already being handled. The FBI will receive an anonymous tip tomorrow morning. Everything David told me, plus the documentation from his flash drive. They'll raid the agency, arrest everyone involved, and start the process of reuniting families. It won't undo what happened, but it might prevent it from happening again. And you'll just walk away? No consequences for your part in all this? His smile was rueful. My only crime was wanting a child badly enough to pay for a surrogate. Everything else, the swap, the fake death, the cover-up, that was done without my knowledge. I'm as much a victim as you were. Are you? I challenged. No, he admitted. But it's a convenient fiction that keeps both of us safe. Sometimes that's the best we can do. Find the least terrible option and live with it. We left the nursery together, but at the junction where the hallway split between our separate wings, I made a choice. Instead of turning toward my suite, I followed Lorenzo to his. He stopped at his doorway, looking back at me with surprise and something that might have been hope. Ava? I'm choosing us, I said simply. All of us. And that means no more separate wings, no more pretending we're just co-parents sharing space. If we're going to be a family, let's be a family. Lorenzo's smile was the first genuinely unguarded expression I'd seen from him. He took my hand, lacing our fingers together, and led me into his space. Into our space now. We didn't sleep together that night, despite sharing his bed. We talked instead, about everything and nothing. About Matteo's future and our pasts. About the world we were bringing him into and the world we wanted to build for him. About all the impossible choices that had led us here, and the one clear choice we were making now. When dawn broke over Lake Michigan, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, I woke in Lorenzo's arms with Matteo nestled between us. He'd woken sometime in the early hours, and Lorenzo had brought him to us without discussion, all of us needing the closeness. My son, I tested the word carefully, partner, my family. It wasn't the life I'd planned, wasn't the safe, normal existence I'd fought so hard to build. But looking at Lorenzo's sleeping face, at Matteo's tiny hand clutching both of our shirts, I realized something. Normal was overrated. Safe was an illusion. And the family I'd found in the most unlikely circumstances was worth every compromise. Every moral gray area, every impossible choice. I was Ava Morelli, mother to the heir of the Valente Empire, partner to a man who lived in shadows, but loved in light. And I was finally, impossibly home.